शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। अचिन्त्यमव्यक्तमनन्तरूपं शिवं प्रशान्तममृतं ब्रह्मयोनिम् तथादिमध्यान्तविहीनमेकं विभुं चिदानन्दमरूपमद्भुतम् उमासहायं परमेश्वरं प्रभुं त्रिलोचनं नीलकण्ठं प्रशान्तम् ध्यात्वा मुनिर्गच्छति भूतयोनिं समस्तसाक्षिं तमसः परस्तात् स ब्रह्मा स शिवः सेन्द्रः सोऽक्षरः परमस्वराट् स एव विष्णुः स प्राणः स कालोऽग्निः स चन्द्रमाः स एव सर्वं यद्भूतं यच्च भव्यं सनातनम् ज्ञात्वा तं मृत्युमत्येति नान्यः पन्था विमुक्तये सर्वभूतस्थमात्मानं सर्वभूतानि चात्मनि सम्पश्यन् ब्रह्म परमं याति नान्येन हेतुना आत्मानमरणिं कृत्वा प्रणवं चोत्तरारणिम् ज्ञाननिर्मथनाभ्यासात् पाशं दहति पण्डितः स एव माया परिमोहितात्मा शरीरमास्थाय करोति सर्वम् स्त्रियन्नपानादिविचित्रभोगैः स एव जाग्रत् परितृप्तिमेति स्वप्ने सजीवः सुखदुःखभोक्ता स्वमायया कल्पितविश्वलोके सुषुप्तिकाले सकले विलीने तमोभिभूतः सुखरूपमेति पुनश्च जन्मान्तरकर्मयोगात् स एव जीवः स्वपिति प्रबुद्धः पुरत्रये क्रीडति यश्च जीवस्ततस्तु जातं सकलं विचित्रम् आधारमानन्दमखण्डबोधं यस्मिन् लयं याति पुरत्रयं च एतस्माज्जायते प्राणो मनः सर्वेन्द्रियाणि च खं वायुर्ज्योतिरापः पृथिवी विश्वस्य धारिणी।
Mantra 6 gives the pointers that point towards the unmanifest reality. These pointers are helpful for us to contemplate deep and finally take us to the point of meditation. Since most of us may not be able to relate to the unmanifest reality in its pristine form is not the word, in its pristine, whatever you call it, a aid is given in Mantra 7 to meditate upon that reality in the form of Lord Shiva. Now, this has to be remembered, it is just not for us who are maybe at the stage of Karma Yoga, but even at the seat of meditation, a person, whoever has reached the state of meditation, they can meditate upon the reality in whichever way they want to. Ultimately, it is the single pointed concentration that leads into realization. transcending the thought is not in our effort, that is very clear. But what can sustain the thought in the last stage as it is, that can be done. That is the subtlest sort of sadhana that can be done. So if that is done using a form also, it is nothing wrong about it. If it is done using the formless reality also, it is most welcome. So we will chant mantra 7 twice.
उमासहायं परमेश्वरं प्रभुं त्रिलोचनं नीलकण्ठं प्रशान्तम् ध्यात्वा मुनिर्गच्छति भूतयोनिं समस्तसाक्षिं तमसः परस्तात् उमासहायं परमेश्वरं प्रभुं त्रिलोचनं नीलकण्ठं प्रशान्तम् ध्यात्वा मुनिर्गच्छति भूतयोनिं समस्तसाक्षिं तमसः परस्तात्.
Meditating upon Parameshwara, consort of Uma, the three-eyed, blue-necked, perfectly calm Lord, the sage, witness of all, reaches the source of beings transcending tamas, ignorance. So the absolute reality is indicated with the form of Lord Shiva for our contemplation and meditation. As I said, it is easier than to concentrate on the unmanifest reality. One of the reasons is, see, suppose we say that even in Vedanta Academy, those who have gone, you know that we have a meditation for 5 minutes on a daily basis, which is part of our schedule. Just before meditation, for a minute, they will give a commentary as to what should be done there, how we must sit, how we must close our eyes, which is all covered in Mantra 5. Gently close your eyes and all the head, neck and back erect, all those things, and abdomen slightly bent forward at the pelvic region so that the center of gravity falls on the center of base. All this is the physical description of the posture, which is the most comfortable posture for meditation. And then when you go beyond the prana into the mind, they say, keep the mind vacant of all thoughts. If any thoughts enter your system, gently dismiss it. Now, as I said, it becomes very difficult to point on that supreme reality which is not relating to any thought that we know of. It is very difficult. On the other hand, let us say if you are meditating upon a form, that form can be any form. Suppose you meditate on Lord Venkateshwara, Lord Shiva, Kali, or any form that is representative of reality for you. That form itself has a wide scope for our concentration. Suppose if the commentary in the same form is given, that you meditate upon that reality, and suppose you close your eyes and I say that I will take you through the form of Lord Venkateshwara from feet to the head or from head to the feet. I am describing it part by part, and in that process you are able to visualize and capture that every part. This is the crown, this is the eyes, this is the face, this is the necklace that is there, and step by step it comes until the feet. So over a long period of time you are able to keep the mind aloft on that thought. We need not go into the debate now whether this is a single pointed concentration or these are multi points. That is irrelevant, because for us the form is the total reality as it is. What is the point of clarification here is, if you are able to concentrate on a form, that seems to be much more simpler than the formless reality. But blessed are those who can directly contemplate upon the formless reality. That is the subtlest, that is the highest. But otherwise, as he said in the previous mantra, in Ananta Rupam he is there. In infinite forms it is the same reality, it is there. So in that infinite form, any one form which inspires you, that form can be meditated upon. So it becomes easy for us. Then what happens, when you go through that form, the beauty of our Dharma, Hindu Dharma, is that each and every form is not arbitrarily given just like that. There is a deep significance and symbolism behind all these forms also. So when you are meditating upon that form, the intellect is able to again get back to that contemplating on the supreme reality which is represented by the form. So the intellect is able to protrude into that reality even as your mind is visualizing the form. So we will see that here Shiva is described with various pointers, which is again highly philosophical and highly symbolic. Plus, when the mind is able to emote with bhakti to the form, the confluence of intellect and mind becomes easy. For the mind to pour out its emotion, there has to be a form, isn't it? To pour out the bhakti to a formless reality is swaswarupa anusandhanam. To say that with that feeling that I am not this body, I am the self. I am not this mind, I am the self. I am not this intellect, I am the self. This is the Nirguna Upasana. This is the worship of the formless Brahman, Nirguna Brahman. And the way in which you do that is also important. It is not the mechanical repetition. It is the feeling with which you negate the body, mind and intellect and assert the self. So, Swaswarupa Anusandhana Bhakti Yabhidiyate, says Shankaracharya. So that is bhakti, definitely, highest form of bhakti. But our understanding of bhakti at a level where we are able to emote, where the reality is presented in a form that is much more comfortable, much more easier, because we are in the process of emoting to various forms already in this world. The love that you show to your wife or husband, the love that you show to the child, the love that you show to a friend, it's all form of love only. That form of love, when in its purest form, is kept on God, it is the bhakti. That's all it is. So therefore, when the emotion is able to integrate with intellect, and then you are able to meditate upon the form, it is a very beautiful practice. It is a very elevating practice. So therefore, in Mantra 7, with the reality in the form of Lord Shiva, he is taking us to the deep recesses of meditation, which may be applicable for all of us, which is easy for all of us. Now, which form to meditate upon? As we said, it is according to each person's inspiration. Whatever form you are liking for reality, that's all it is. It can be any form. That's why we said in terms of worship in general, you say that you worship the Devata or the God which is there in your grama, which is your society, which is where everybody should congregate and do. Like for Calcutta, it's Kali, like that it is. Then you worship your Kula Devata, which is the God which is maintained in your family, in your tradition, that you do and then pass it on to the next generation also. In that sense, a tradition continues. This is helpful in even passing the sanskar to the next generation, like that it is. All this is fine. But it can be the same, it can be different, but each and every person has what is known as a Ishta Devata. Ishta Devata is a form that you like, which you are able to relate to. And that way again, Hinduism has given us a buffet. Whichever you want, you can choose from. It is according to each person's like, it's according to each person's inspiration. You cannot ask why. That is what is inspiring for him. It could be Hanuman, it could be Ganesha, it could be Shiva, anything for that matter. It could be a symbol like Om also. It could be the javelin. In the javelin we say it's not spear or javelin. What do you say? What is in the hands of Kartikeya? That one. Whatever is comfortable for you, that can be taken as the form. Here, in this Upanishad, he is given the form of Lord Shiva. Yes, sir.
You see that meditating upon a form is easier and it helps you attain the same end. Yet you say, blessed are those who can meditate upon formless. So, what's that? Why?
When I say blessed, I am talking in terms of subtlety, that's all. If you remember, Swamiji says about karma, bhakti and jnana, to reach the same place, when you go by cycle, it is karma yoga. To reach it by train, it is bhakti yoga. By flight, it is jnana yoga. Per se, jnana yoga is definitely subtler, where like a ball is being hit sixer in every ball. That means the runs are being scored faster. If it is 2 runs and a boundary, it is little slow, and single run every time is slowest. But the question is, what is your level of comfort and what is the mode of transport that you must take? Per se, analysis wise, definitely Jnana Yoga is subtler than Karma Yoga, where the thoughts are, going towards the Brahman in a greater frequency. On the other hand, to do the hard work to keep the thought on that reality is the path of Karma Yoga, where to not relate with the fruits of action and go in a steady way. Now, this is not to say something is slow or fast, but definitely something is gross or subtle according to the equipment that we use, etc. But the main thing is, who is the Adhikari and what should he concentrate upon? So it is not that this medicine is best, therefore this you must take. According to your disease and the stage of your disease, whatever is prescribed for you, what is correct for you, that has to be taken. So in that sense I said, so if a person is able to negate and assert reality by just the process of negating the matter in him and assert the spirit in him, probably that is the ideal way. And that is when I say ideal, not that the other thing is not ideal, that is probably the direct way. Let us put it this way, that is the most direct way. Otherwise, so even to, let us say, to get into this worship of a form, to get into that frequency of always keeping the form in your mind, that is why it is said that if you are a Shiva Bhakta or you are in that lineage, then you read the Shiva Purana and then you hear the glories of Lord Shiva. Then what happens is that that you assert that my Lord is the Supreme Lord. That is why you will find in some stories, Shiva's devotee even defeats a Vishnu or something like that. So we are confused whether Vishnu is greater or Shiva is greater. In Bhagavad Puran, you will find that Krishna is a avatar of Vishnu. It is considered he defeats Shiva's power, something like that. So that is why very interesting. In the next mantra, he is saying, Sa Brahma, Sa Shiva, Sa Indra, Sa Vishnu. So in the initial stage for us, that Lord, which is the Supreme Lord, is representative of the reality, but our mind is able to concentrate on the form. It is for us to reach a stage where we go beyond all forms and say, he is actually Shiva, he is actually Vishnu. There is absolutely nothing apart from him only. So this you can take as an aid, just as a child which is wanting to walk will hold on to a walker for a while. And then finally the aim is to leave the walker and walk alone. In that sense I said. So in terms of what is subtle, it is said. Nothing to do with something is superior or inferior, not at all, because it is Adhikari specific there. Yes, sir.
So why is the word bhuti only used here? Because that it's a single womb of beings.
I haven't come to that. Yes.
Sir, when we are talking about Nirgun Samadhi and the form, it has to be a graduation. Person would have gone through the process of first going through the form, meditating on the form, and then going to Nirgun.
See, 1 minute. It is with reference to Upasana, we are talking about meditation, which is the last stage. That is the subtlest of sadhana that we can think of or know, where the thoughts are all converged into that last point, single pointed focus. And then to maintain the mind in that absolute silence is what we can really even conceive of. What really happens after that, we really do not know. That is why statements like Moksha Ishyami Ma Shuchaha, I am giving you liberation. Somebody is giving. Okay. It is suppose, I am sure we have not understood that way, but if anybody has understood that with reference to worshipping of something with the form will take us up to that loka of that form only, not that ultimate. Worshipping of Nirgun will only take us to the ultimate self, which is the supreme self, which we call a self-realization. It is not so. It is not so. Whether we go through a Saguna Upasana or Nirguna Upasana, whether we go through a predominance of Karma Yoga or whatever it is, finally, the whole aim is to bring all the sadhana towards that single pointed convergence. That's about all. That single pointed convergence can be, that thought can be with form, without form, whatever it is. That thought is now centered around reality. That's all it is. Now, it is up to that reality to take the thought out of existence. So, There have been very many cases where people have even sort of physically merged with the deity, is what we hear of stories. Now, it is a question how far we believe it or not believe it. It is up to each person. When we talk about Saint Meera, it is said that finally what happened is that she merged with the deity of Lord Krishna in Dwaraka. This is the history or story of Meera. Andal merged with Lord Ranganatha. This we see as even physical merger, right? These are stories. But if we are able to understand with reference to the thought merger, which we understand in Vedantic parlance as self-realization, that final thought, whatever it can be, going out of existence of that thought, where the last traces of ego or individuality is completely annihilated, which is not through our effort, because any effort which is finite cannot give us the infinite. It is the infinite grace which gives the infinite, as it were. So that which is doing that, it is not necessary that the last thought has to be with form, without form, anything like that as it is prescribed. All that we need to do is work hard on bringing our thought centered towards that reality in whichever way you are able to conceive. Once that is there, sustained long enough, by the grace of the Supreme, as though the sun makes the water evaporate, draws it as it were, the final thought is drawn as it were into that infinite reality. So it is, in other words, in no way that we are talking anything inferior about worship with form or nothing like that. That is why in the Upanishad it is given. We are not talking about a Bhagavad Gita or any Purana here. Upanishad, both the things are given, and various other Upanishads even prescribe various other upasanas also for the thing with form. But the direct and most clear-cut way is if you are able to go by that formless reality pointed out by various pointers, etc., and reach the Supreme directly. There is no other way, because that is a Kaivalya thing. That is the most direct thing. Yeah.
In this process of concentrating on a single content thought and then ultimately merging into silence, gives us an appearance of sort of an understanding in the way that it is nothingness. How then can Shunyavadin, the one who says that everything requires total silence, differs from our Vedantic point of view?
That's what. From our thing now, it seems to be nothingness, but it is not actually nothingness. So, in other words, with reference to the deep sleep, where we go through on a daily basis, the thought seems to go into somewhere where we are not aware where it goes. So that stage, what the individuality is referred to as nothingness there. But even in that stage, very interesting, in this mantra only, he is saying finally, tamasa parastat. There is, tamas is that absolute ignorance, absolute state of zero. But beyond that, there is something that is referred to as infinite. Now, as far as our mind is concerned, our mind can not conceive both zero and infinity. But infinity is beyond zero. So the waking and dream states are finite states with reference to any number that we can conceive of. The zero from which these two arise is referred to as the shunya from our experience, which is nothingness is defined as absence of anything. So thought itself is not there means anything is not there. So as far as you are concerned, you are experiencing nothingness. But in that state, what is actually being there is this supreme reality. That is why in our experience, what do we say? Even for that nothingness, there is a sakshi. That sakshi is what makes you say that I had a good sleep, etc. So therefore, that somebody is not sleeping even when you are sleeping. That is referred to as that the infinite self within you. Now, as far as the proof of this is concerned, you have to, I think, go through again the portion of the theory of perception, where he says how he proves that there is a reality behind each and every existence. So that reality that is behind each and every existence cannot be nothing. It is something that we do not know. But if it is not anything that is finite, which is conceivable within the thought, we can project it to be infinite. That's about all. So therefore, what it is getting absorbed into is not nothingness, as some of the philosophies say. Beyond nothingness is the infinite reality.
No, but in that case, what you are referring to, it is debated that who is saying that there is nothingness. In that, when the question who comes, then the question of this Atman or Paramatman, all these things come.
Correct.
But here, when you are meditating and when you have reached the last spot and understand the difference between deep sleep ignorance, that is tamasic, as well, and vis-a-vis referred to a meditative silence which is sattvic and dynamic. That I understand. But the question point of view is, in case of that ultimate silence, when the last thought goes, if there is a person who is seeing it as we define it that way, that means the ego is still present who is seeing it.
So what is seeing is not the ego. That is the point. What is seeing is not the ego. So therefore, the difference between deep sleep, which is in the, you can say is the absolute tamas, and here what is shown as Shuddha Sattva. That is, it is beyond tamas here, it is beyond sattva here. Here, the awareness is absolutely there. So therefore, the thought goes away. So it is pure awareness. It's pure consciousness, which we will not be able to conceive now. So that is why the state of Godhood is defined as objectless awareness. There is no object for your thought there. Therefore, it is called as pure awareness. In deep sleep, actually the pure awareness is there, but we are not aware of it because we are still in the cycle of Maya. It is there. So that is the difference there. So it is not, we cannot conceive it to be a state of Shunyavada as it is. So it is very logical that it is pure awareness, because imagine the last thought itself, the thought is disintegrating in your own witness. You are disintegrating as it were. So that pure awareness, when the only what snaps is that last ray of the thought. So the pure awareness remains as it is. So it is like saying, if the objects are all not there, will it not be dark here? No, it will not be dark here. Light is there, except that we cannot prove or see pure light. But there is nothing that is not there within the scope of awareness. So how can we say that beyond realization, awareness will not be there? That pure awareness is referred to as infinity, not Shunya. Yes.
So unless one is highly evolved and you are always aware of the supreme reality, form or formless, there is no way that your last thought can be form or formless. So, and how about most of the time one dies on a ventilator or some natural death. So, what, is it right if I say that one should focus?
Sorry, ventilator
or unnatural death? We do not know. It's sudden death, so you don't really know where you will die. So unless you are highly evolved and you always focus on the supreme reality, the last thought cannot be a supreme reality. Is that the right way to think?
Again and again, don't relate last thought to the last thought before death. Here we are talking about the last thought before your ego dies, which is in the state of meditation. So don't worry, that person will have many janmas to have his last thought. So the thing is, so that is why philosophically it is said, do every activity of yours in this world as though it is your last action. Imagine, see why we are so relaxed in doing whatever we are doing. We believe there is enough time for everything, right? We are immortal. We have plans for another 100 years. Even the oldest person, not in this class, even the oldest person, the earth will have plan for another 100 years. So we just don't believe. And so therefore, when we say just why are you wasting time, think of God, means why? He wants to also, but there are so many other preoccupations, so many other things, so that can wait, that sort of a thing comes. But imagine if a date is fixed for you or for any person, and he knows, and let us assume that is true. He believes also it is true also. What will be his attitude to life? What will be his action? Now, again, when I say you can only try to imagine, because we just cannot imagine now. Because you'll say, what is this? It's very hypothetical situation. Like that only we'll think. It is not so. Anything can strike any time. Now, if in that case, if you are able to know that, you will probably do everything, whatever is the best that you can do towards, or at that level, what you know is the highest point of spirituality. To that extent only you will think of and do. Therefore, suddenly this last thought doesn't come. In the 8th chapter of Gita, very clearly it says, and I believe this also 100%, it is interpreted also that way. Whatever last thought a person has before physical death, that is where he goes. It is You can take it to be a law. You can take it. 100% you can take it. But the last thought in most cases, even a person who is not going through ventilator or an accident or unnatural death, last thought is not in his hands. Most of the time it becomes resultant of, he may even lose his consciousness, he may blabber something, he may mutter something. So most of the times it is the resultant of all the thoughts that are going around his head, where it consolidates or where it points out to, that's where it will be. So that is why all the sages and saints who have realized or who are in the path of bhakti, who have known this value, they always say, keep on maintaining this thought throughout the life. Only if you maintain the thought throughout the life, then it will naturally come there also. So therefore, and let us say the power of Kali Yuga is so much that it is not easy to maintain. Therefore, you at least mutter Lord's name or something which will help you to relate to that thought in some form or other. At least some percentage will be there like that it is. So therefore, the preparation starts much early. So therefore, you cannot say that I'll wait till 60 where I'm retired, or I can wait till 70 or 50. Nothing like that. There is no guarantee of the next moment for us. So therefore, we have to start practicing this awareness of the supreme reality as soon or as early as possible. Then what you do is you go through the karma, you go through your householder's life, you go through whatever you are going through. But one aspect of your personality is stung on to that. If that is kept going with a continuous momentum, then don't worry. It will come at the time of physical death also, and therefore whatever you are going to think of the... So, in fact, various places the Lord gives promise that even if my devotee is not able to think of me, I will come and present himself. So, as I said, he is giving a promise. When we did that last mantra of Ishavasya, we did the Charma Shloka. In that Varaha Purana Charma Shloka, Lord Varaha, Lord Narayana in the form of Varaha, he gives the promise that Smarami Madbhaktam Nayami Paramam Gatim, he says. When he is lying on a deathbed like a wood, where he is not able to speak properly, where all the cough and other things are holding him, but he having thought of me earlier, it becomes my bounden duty that I will remember him, because he has been remembering me all this while. I will remember him. Smarami Madbhaktam, I will remember my devotee. Nayami Paramam Gatim, I will take him in the right path. This we said in the context of in the Ishavasya, last two mantras says, Kratos Smara Kritagam Smara. He is telling his mind, oh mind, remember it. Oh mind, remember it, he says. And 18th last mantra, he says, Agne Naya Supata, oh Lord of fire, take me in the right path. So this devotee has been actually praying that he must remember and take me in the right path. The direct echo or the pratidhvani for that comes in the Varaha Purana, where the Lord gives the assurance. So, literally take it that way. But whether you, even as you, let's say a person goes away in an accident, the last thought or the last word that will come out of him will be something related to what he has done only. So, we need not worry on that count. So, since the last thing is mostly not in our hands, it's resultant, it is better to create that resultant in this way. We can only try towards that extent. Okay. Now, which form? As I said, any form that it is inspiring. Here, the form of Lord Shiva is given, and in this Upanishad it is emphasized, and later also in the towards the end of this Upanishad he is going to give a practice for all of us to do. There also he is talking about Shatarudriya. Shatarudriya is a Vedic text which contains hundreds of names of Lord Shiva as a practice. So this is centered around, so that is why the form you worship, the form you meditate upon, the shloka that you say are all centered around Lord Shiva in this Upanishad. The first pointer here he has given for Lord Shiva is Uma Sahayam, consort of goddess Uma. There is a beauty in our, again, Hindu Dharma to worship the reality always in the form of a pair, a Dampati, Shiva and Parvati, Vishnu and Lakshmi, Brahma and Saraswati. And Saraswati is part of Brahma only. She is in her tongue, in his tongue. Vishnu has Lakshmi in her heart. Shiva has given half of his body to Parvati. So they are never separate. Now, Shiva wedded to Parvati means the Prakriti is wedded to Purusha. Purusha is wedded to Prakriti. They are inseparable force. So Uma Sahayam means that supreme self which is the substratum. So Shiva is understood in that form. Also, we saw in Kenopanishad, Uma, Haimavati, son of a daughter of Himalayas, Himavan, is representative of Brahma Vidya. Correct. Upanishads. And Shiva meditating in the Himalayas is reveling in that Upanishadic thought only. So, it's much more inspiring. In Kalahasti, which is near Tirupati, the great kshetra for Vayu, she is Jnanamba, goddess. So, Uma Sahayam is meditating upon the reality which is shown to us through Brahma Vidya. Uma Sahayam. Meaning, the self and the knowledge of the self are inseparable. It is through the knowledge of the self that you reach the self. The Shakti is never separated from the Shaktiman. Can you think of any power which hangs by itself? No, there has to be a conscious entity which holds it. That is why Shakti, which is Uma, is always with Shiva. All this is fine. But in devotion, you have to visualize and worship Shiva as a consort of Uma. That is much more soothing to the heart, as it were. A picture of renunciation in our Hindu Dharma is Shiva and Parvati in a householder's life. That's the picture of renunciation there. And it's very interesting. This term Uma is a very powerful term in one of the interpretations. Again, it is a very beautiful thing to know about. This term Om, if it is given a form, they say it is Uma. It's very interesting. Uma also is split it into the syllables. It is U plus plus A comes. And that A is extended to A because she is feminine. That's all. It is Om in another form only. So look at it that way. Uma Sahayam. So through the Om, as it were, you reach that supreme reality. These are again very beautiful Vedantic interpretations that you can go deep into. But ultimately, it is Lord Shiva. It is that form. Uma Sahayam. Parameshwaram. Parameshwaram is Supreme Lord. Lord Shiva is referred to as the Supreme Brahman. With reference to macrocosm, he is everything. This term Parameshwara is referring to Lord Shiva only, but it is a term that is used for the Supreme Brahman also. In Atma Bodha, these two terms are used. Atma Bodha, as you know, is knowledge of the self, direct knowledge of the self by Shankaracharya, where in one verse he says, Tishthantam Parameshwaram, he says. Parameshwaram refers to the Supreme Reality. But generally, when we use the term Parameshwara, it refers to Lord Shiva. And in the same Atma Bodha, he uses the word Vishnu also. So there is no such thing as two different gods or anything like that. It is the same supreme reality that it represents. With reference to macrocosm, he is Parameshwara. With reference to microcosm, he is indicated as Prabhu. Prabhu means Lord. So you can say that petrol is the Lord of all cars. So the supreme reality, which is the Lord of all beings, which is the power behind everything, which makes everything happen, that is called as Prabhu. Then Trilochanam, a unique feature of Lord Shiva. Of course, we see in Durga also, Trinayani, it's the same. Trilochanam means three-eyed. The third eye refers to the Jnana Chakshu, or the eye of wisdom. This eye of wisdom is deeper than the fleshy eyes that we have. The physical eyes that we have is able to see the names and forms outside, the forms outside. But in and through every form, there is this Atman, this Brahman, which is the core of every personality. With Jnana, you open up this third eye slowly, and you are able to penetrate and see the reality beyond the names and forms. This is indicated as the third eye. You will see it drawn on the forehead. Otherwise, how do you show it? That's why every god and god also have 4 hands to represent the 4 aspects of our subtle body. So mind, how can you picture it? So 4 hands are given for the reality. Like that it is, you will find the third eye drawn. It is Jnana Chakshu. It has been long, but we always, I don't have the book, Daffodils talks about this. Wordsworth is of a very great spiritual experience, must be. So when he wrote Daffodils, it is probably the closest and the parallel is to Vedanta directly there. And Swamiji revels whenever he takes Daffodils because it shows the path of karma, bhakti and jnana yoga culminating in renunciation and then withdrawal and then meditation and then into self-realization. How can such a person conceive such a poetry? That's why it's not conceived. It just flowed out of his system. So in that he first talks about karma yoga. He says, I walked lonely. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills. When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. So the first 2 lines indicate karma yoga. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Lonely is referring to, lonely is with reference to a person who is inspired. So obviously he is not in a crowd, but not lonely, nomadic in an indifferent way, like a cloud. Cloud is a picture of spirit and sacrifice. So you wander. Wander means you are on the move. Not with groups, alone, because a person who is alone is inspired like a cloud, but he is of service to others. And such a person's mind is aloft, it floats on high over vales and hills. So all the pairs of opposites in the world he is crossed over. It is in that heightened state of mind that when it is so inspired that you see nature in its pristine form. Then all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. A comma is given there after the host, there in the original, which is not grammatically right, but it is there to probably express the ecstasy that there is a pause, a host of golden daffodils. So suddenly this golden daffodils hit up. So he is able to somewhat now see something. Yeah, imagine this cannot be understood unless you have a poet's mind. If we can understand the opposite, if we are totally preoccupied with all the problems and all the things, you may not even see whether there's a beautiful daffodil or anything else is there. Or if it hits you also, you'll say, what is this? It is irritating me. You will probably throw it away. You will not see daffodils or you will not see anything that is in tune with nature. But that, as we said, if you are silent, the nature itself sort of reveals itself. That revelation has come to him. So he is seeing daffodils in that way. Beneath the trees, besides the lake, fluttering and dancing with the breeze, he says. So he sees now and he goes into raptures. Then the next part is only bhakti. Bhakti is where he explains the beauty of daffodils. So in that's why every poet, everything, when you go into that mood of emotions and bhakti, it is just descriptions which strikes you at that point of time and you are reveling in it. So you will see some kirtan of somebody saying that Krishna was wearing necklace and Krishna was wearing this anklet. What is the big deal? Anklet will be there in the legs and necklace will be in the neck. What is the big deal? He is actually reveling in that form of Krishna where he is losing himself into it. That emotion is called as bhakti. Continuous as the stars that shine along the Milky Way, they toss their, in the along the margin of the bay, tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. No, I'm forgetting. 10,000s I saw at a glance, tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. The waves beside them dance, but they outdid the waves in a sparkling glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. And up till this point, it's only reveling in that. So he compares the wave of the daffodil with the wave of the lake and everything. It was so beautiful. So he's actually, mind is sort of floating with the daffodils now. And then these two lines, I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. This is the jnana, where he is talking about contemplation. Gazed and little thought, meaning pinpointedly he is seeing, and he is into the contemplation of reality. So when the mind is able to appreciate that, it becomes bhakti. When the intellect is able to penetrate, it becomes jnana. And then he is away from it now. He has come home, and then he is recalling that experience. It has now put him in an ecstasy. He is not able to forget it. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye. That is the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Now he is withdrawn. He is into his own inward rooms, where he is lying on the couch, in vacant or in pensive mood, in vacant of all the worldly thoughts, pensive of the reality. Daffodils represents a reality here. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye. Now they are flashing upon that inward eye. That inward eye is the third eye. It is a jnana chakshu. He is able to see the daffodils now, as it were. He is not in front of daffodils, but he is able to see the daffodil, which is the bliss of solitude. Solitude may be taken as a representation or symbolism of meditation. Now he is meditating upon the reality. Reality, as I said, any form. You take the form of daffodils here. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Once the thought of daffodils merges, he and daffodils are no more two entities. It has become one. So everybody is able to awaken their inner wisdom towards this. It is a process, gradual process. It will come. It doesn't come by reading. It doesn't come by many debating and questioning. It is by real jnanam. It is by contemplating upon that reality. A person who is able to awaken this third eye, as we said, it all starts with the open eye meditation. If you are able to start seeing each and everything in the world with that eye, then only when you close the eyes that will come. So it is to invoke the reality in each and every experience. Then it comes. So here Trilochanam obviously is an indication of that. But Lord Shiva is meditated upon as Trilochanam. And another famous term always used for Lord Shiva, and particularly in various places it is given, is Neelakantam. Neelakanta is a blue-necked. Blue-necked is when he had drank the Hala Hala Visha, which was coming out of the milky ocean when it was churned. Samudra Manthan story, you know, that when the Devas and Asuras churned for Amrita, first thing that came was Visha, and then came various other good things. Lastly comes Amrita, and this story is symbolic at various levels. And it has enough lessons in management, it has enough lessons in Purana, it has enough lessons for us in Vedanta, in personal point of view, sadhana, everything. So, but what is interesting is, everybody claimed whenever anything came out of it, I want it. Only when the Visha came, nobody claimed it. And who wanted that was Lord Shiva. Who can handle that was Lord Shiva only. So when he drank, it is said that it was caught here. So his throat or the neck became blue. What it means is, when this Milky Ocean represents the sattvic mind of us. In that sattvic mind only you can churn and aim to get Amrita, which is immortality. Immortality is the self which is there deep within the recesses of your own personality. It has to be drawn from within you only. You use your experiences, you use your ego and churn with all the positive and negative tendencies participating in it. But interestingly, when a person starts a spiritual journey like this, what comes out first is poison. So that is why many people feel very agitated, or it is said that probably they were happy before coming into contact with Vedanta or spirituality. It is right in a way. But your awareness, when it increases and all the negativities needs to be purged out. Otherwise, negativities are not gone. When a person is happily living his own life. It is like you having a disease and not be aware of the disease. Just by not thinking of the disease, that way disease is not going to go. It is better to deal with it and purge it out, take it out. So when a person is churning his personality, with this awareness, the negativities will come out. We can even use the statement of which is attributed to Christ in here. It is apt here also. Judge not others and resist not evil. It is applicable both in the objective point of view and subjective point of view. So when we say resist not evil, when you churn your personality, these negativities are bound to come. Don't resist it. Don't resist it means don't suppress it. Don't at the same time curse yourself. It is very difficult to handle. So therefore what you do, you need to practice that objectivity as picturized by Lord Shiva. You have to somewhere store it here. Not allowing that poison to go into the head or heart. Head represents your thinking, heart represents your emotions. So let that negativity not disturb your thinking or emotions. You have to carefully deal with it. It is difficult because we have seen even in the songs of very many great saints that when they turn a new leaf or take a U-turn in their lives and go towards reality, they themselves are talking about how much time they wasted in the past and what all they have gone through or how they have simply wasted their time. So they definitely there will be a regret. That regret to an extent is okay, but do not dwell on that past and the negativities for long, because you need to just deal with it. There is no point lingering on the past because you are not going to go to the past and change it. If I had a chance, probably I would have also done very many things when I was young. But there is no chance to go to the childhood. There's no chance to go to the previous Janma. Nothing. It's past is fate accomplished. You have to just deal with it. So that, so to that extent, we need to only practice objectivity. It is difficult. When some tragedy hits others, it is somewhat easy to philosophize. But when it hits us, so that's why you have to hold it here. Let that lump not go in. So the blue-necked Shiva is representative of that. But again, you have to not forget the picture of the verse, which is to meditate Shiva as it is. All these are symbolism that we are saying. But Shiva has to be meditated as it is. You can picturize Shiva and meditate on him, who has all these features. Prashantam. This Prashantam word came in fifth mantra also. Always wherever Shiva is there, this Prashantam word will be there. That absolute Shivam, which is Brahman, is also Prashantam, absolute tranquility. Picture of Shiva is also tranquility. Always the picture of Shiva is given in the background of Himalayan white snow-capped mountains, where he is serene and seated and as though he merges into the Himalayas as it is. That is tranquility. Prashantam, perfectly calm, absolutely tranquil. Why this tranquility is always there is, you will also see Shiva himself in a meditative pose. Tranquility or calmness upon which when you meditate, when the mind meditates, can it reach calmness? Whatever we are able to place the mind on, that is the property that the mind is able to acquire. If you always keep the mind on something which is fast moving and other things, the mind also gets automatically agitated. It begins to move. See, suppose you listen to a song which is of a rap music, jazz music, something like that. When the mind is placed on that, automatically the body starts shaking and you will want to dance and go along with those beats. It is quite automatic. When you go to Eden Gardens and everybody is shouting there and dancing and shouting for your team, automatically you will also do that. The mind is placed upon that which is here little rajasic. So the mind takes that. So now when we are wanting to go into absolute calmness, the mind has to be placed in absolute calmness. So the picture of Shiva or Shivalinga, it is of that nature, it is of that quality, that it is absolutely tranquil, Prashantam. And then in the same mantra he says, Dhyatva Munir Gachati, a sage who is meditating like this reaches the Supreme Self, which is the ultimate Brahman. That ultimate Brahman, which is the formless reality or whatever you want to call it, the ultimate Supreme, That is indicated in these three terms here. Bhuta Yonim, source of all beings. So here, that same Shiva which is in the form, meditating upon it, you reach this, he says. So it's a very clear indication. Suppose somebody wants, you can give this as a reference, that whatever way you meditate, finally you end up here only, which is the source of all beings. The absolute source of all beings is the self. As we saw in the last verse, he talks about Brahma Yonam. Here it's the Bhuta Yonam, it's the same thing. Samasta Sakshim. Samasta Sakshim means it is witness of all. Witness is that which empowers everything and in a detached way watches everything. That is witness. Witness is not an indifferent witness. Witness is yes, you can say an indifferent watcher or one who sees, but having make everything happen. That is a Sakshi. Otherwise, this English term witness doesn't give the punch that the term Sakshi gives. A person who is not connected also can see something and go without participating or anything, any way. But here, he is talking about that which is the Bhuta Yonam, that which is the source of all beings, that from which everything emerges, everything goes into. But what is it actually? It is just merely a witness, not participating anything as it is. Samasta Saksham, witness of all, witness of, and in your own self, the self is the witness. In the next Upanishad, when we do, we will see that very beautifully this is picturized. This witness, he talks about two birds sitting in a tree. One of the most famous metaphors of the great Upanishads. He's talking about two birds. He says one bird is eating the fruit and the other bird is just witnessing. Wonderful, wonderful metaphor. So that is with reference to individual also, the self is the witness. Bhuta Yonim, Samasta Sakshim and Tamasa Parastat. Beyond tamas, beyond ignorance. Again, this term, Tamasa Parastat, you will find it occurring in regular way in various Upanishads and even in Bhagavad Gita it comes. I think in 13th chapter it comes, Tamasa Parastat. The Supreme Self is always indicated as that which is beyond ignorance, beyond ignorance. So that means, why it is emphasized like that is, with reference to all that we know in the world which is conditioned knowledge, which is conditioned consciousness, there is absolute ignorance, as we were discussing in the question of Sudhakar Kabra, that in terms of numbers, it is easy to understand. That which is a zero, which is beyond all numbers is there, but zero is something which is not conceivable, isn't it? If you want to explain zero, how will you explain zero? One you can explain, two you can explain, zero how can you explain? You cannot. You can only say, I will give you 2 chocolates and then take away 2 chocolates. How many chocolates you have? You can't say 0 chocolates, because 0 chocolates means what? The 0 can be, you can say 0 elephants also, it's the same thing. So 0 and chocolates are not anything connected, but to explain 0, you have to do something like this. You have to explain 2 minus 2 is 0, something like that. So 0 is something which is inconceivable. It is beyond. But then how are we to conceive something which is beyond 0? That is why it is emphasized here. Infinite is beyond 0. So tamasa parasta. Tamasa is ignorance. So in other words, till realization, whatever stage that we are, whatever stages of consciousness that we go through, everything is in the realm of ignorance. So till the dawn of knowledge of the self occurs, dawns upon us, we are in that realm only. And only a Brahmajnani who has opened up to that highest state of, fourth state of consciousness is enlightened. He is the only person who has a real jnana. All others, in terms of degree, little high or little low, we are all in the realm of ignorance only. We are under the spell of Maya only. So therefore, when he is indicating about the self, this term is often used that it is tamasa parasta, transcending ignorance, completely gaining the knowledge of the self. So it is not only talking about that state of the self, it is talking about even the path that one must take towards reaching that self. Meditating upon Parameshwara, consort of Uma, the three-eyed, blue-necked, perfectly calm Lord, the sage, witness of all, reaches the source of beings, transcending tamas, ignorance. We'll conclude with the bhajans here.
पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः